evening, everyone. Those of us joining us in Central European time at 6 o'clock. So a very good evening and welcome to this talk about how to get your film funded. My name is Tiny Mungwe. I'm a producer of documentaries and cultural happenings based in South Africa. And I'm welcoming you here on a talk that is going to be centered around the South African reality, but I hope that it connects with everybody who's not from South Africa. This is a panel on how to get your film funded, which is organized by Girls in Film. Girls in Film is a network, a platform that champions and connects the new generation of female, non-binary and trans creatives in the film industry. They work with connecting gendered people with opportunities for production, connecting creatives, brands, institutions, and media to create original and engaging film content. They have an online film platform called Girls in Film _RSA on Instagram, as well as a website, which is girlsinfilm.net, in which you can find out more about what they do. And it's a open and democratic worldwide community of gendered persons making film, filmmakers, creatives, and fans of films and stories by women. They also organize events around many issues surrounding the making of content for people in cities such as London, Prague, New York, Los Angeles, Mauritius, Amsterdam, and South Africa. And today I have an illustrious panel of South African-based operators in the film industry. From the National Film and Video Foundation, we have Refilwe Hlaboiwa, who is the production manager at the National Film and Video Foundation in South Africa, as well as Nombuso Magubane, who is the manager of marketing and communication. And by way of filmmakers and storytellers, we have Leila Swart, a South African editor, used to be an editor and now a prolific producer of films, including the most recent one. Actually, I'll ask the filmmakers to talk about their filmographies themselves. We also have Lesedi Moche, who also is sometimes a curator, curating presently the Durban International Film Festival's documentary program, as well as a filmmaker in South Africa and other countries in Africa. So I'll ask each of you to please introduce yourselves, what you do, and how you're positioned in the industry. I'll start with you, Refilwe, from the NFVF.
Thank you, Tiny. My name is Refilwe Hlaboiwa. I'm a production and development manager at the NFVF. So I work primarily with fiction content. So what I do is basically evaluate projects that come in. I think it's a monitoring and evaluation sort of position, giving feedback to scripts that come in, as well as films, cuts of films. So just to give a short synopsis of what NFVF does for people that maybe aren't aware, it's a film funding body. It's an agency of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. So basically, we give funding to film practitioners, I think, throughout the whole value chain of film. So basically from grassroots. So if you're a student and you're looking for, funding to study film, you can apply. If you're looking for development funding, production funding, marketing and distribution funding, if you're looking for funding to go to a film festival, then or research about the industry, then NFVF is where you'd start.
That's really great. And I think I'd like to come back to you during the course of the conversation to find out more about the processes for processing funding, the kind of benchmarks that you use to evaluate funding proposals, because I think that you guys use kind of global best practices, and it will benefit everyone in the call, even people working outside of South Africa. And maybe we can talk a little bit also about how people not making content in South Africa can connect with South African producers such as Leila and Lesedi in order to access opportunities with the National Film and Video Foundation. So Nombuso, please introduce yourself and how you positioned both at the NFVF as well as the industry.
Thank you so much, Tiny. My name is Nombuso Makubane. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager for the NFVF. What that entails is two-pronged. There's two audiences that we have a vested interest in. The first is the film industry, because we're all about making sure there's a growth in the film industry. It's actually equitable growth. It's not just plain growth. And second to that, all the wonderful movies that are either funded or produced without our funding in South Africa need to be seen by somebody. So we encourage eyeballs for those movies. We do that using film festivals. We do that using training and education, encouraging people to take up the career in film. So our core reason is to find all possible ways to grow the industry. And we know that one of the biggest hurdles to the growth of the industry is funding, which is why part of my role is communicating the funding opportunities that are available. And even in instances where it's not enough, we advise young people on where else they could get possible funding to grow their passion of making sure South African stories are told. Past experience is corporate, so being in this space is a total shock to my system, but the passion I have as a South African to just see South African kids grow is propelling me to really do the best I can in the space. Thank you.
And that passion is unmistakable. I can definitely hear it in your voice. Leila, the last film of yours I watched was Nako City, but I know that you've been very busy ever since. And also that Nako City was very interestingly funded. So I'm really looking forward to talking to you, but please introduce yourself for the 50 people in the room who may not know you.
Thanks, Tiny. Yeah, I'm Leila Swart, and I'm a producer and editor, as you mentioned. I started my own company about 5 years ago called Yellowbone Entertainment. And since then, I've produced 5 films and 1 major television series. And it's been an interesting road. So I'm really looking forward to sharing and engaging on this panel in terms of how to get a film funded, because that is the golden ticket question that everybody wants to know. And there are many ways to do that. So yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I look forward to it.
Okay, cool. And Lesedi, I mean, I've known you for a long time as a film programmer, film curator from when you used to run Encounters Film Festival. But I was very happy to see that you are producing a film in Uganda and that you're moving very comfortably into the production space over the last couple of years. Please introduce yourself to the audience in terms of what you do and how you're positioned in the industry.
Cool. My name is Lesedi Olukomoche, and as Tiny said, I done producing, programming, but in the last maybe 5 to 8 years, mostly concentrating on programming, looking specifically at African films and platforms that African films can show on. From a producing perspective, mostly television, and also really working as a supervising producer for first-time filmmakers around the continent. So the film I'm working on right now in Uganda is by 2 first-time filmmakers. And yeah, we've made some headway. I've also sat on adjudicating panels for grant-giving organizations. So in terms of this chat, I just wanted to be able to share with the audience what it is from that perspective in terms of what they need to look at. So yeah, and thank you for inviting me.
Super. I think for most producers working in the industry, you try and follow where opportunities are for funding, where opportunities are. And I think it's very tricky for filmmakers to know what opportunities mean, what funds, what obligations are there that funds kind of come with, but also what are the different kinds of opportunity you can position your film for that may not be monetary, but that can get your film funded. So there's a lot of platforms from, the National Film and Video Foundation who are here, film commissions regionally in South Africa, foreign film funds, as well as equity investors who give opportunity for some kind of financial contribution into film projects that are on the go. What are the kind of funding opportunities that you've been able to access as a producer? I'm going to start with you, Leila, particularly looking around the feature films and the series that you've produced in South Africa.
Thanks, Tiny. I think I missed the first part of your question. You said, what funding have I been able to access?
Yeah, what are the kind of funding and what are the differences in the kind of funding opportunities that you've been able to access? So grant funding, equity funding, yeah.
Got you. I think what's very interesting, just to preface that, is I think that the landscape in terms of financing film and television right now is shifting in mammoth ways, that is seeing us all adapt to a different kind of model. Prior to this, I have raised finance through a combination of government grants as well as the rebate and gap or venture capital loans from the likes of the IDC and the National Empowerment Fund. And that kind of model, I think, is a very good model for a first-time filmmaker or a second-time filmmaker, but it's also something that one hopes we build ourselves enough to not have to rely on as we build this industry. My first film, which was So Winter to My Skin, was made with a combination of the National Empowerment Funds, venture capital loan and equity, as well as the Industrial Development Corporation as a venture capital loan and cash flow. And then the NFVF came on board with production funding support. And we had the Department of Trade and Industries Black Emerging Filmmakers Rebate Incentive. Ultimately, with that first film, I didn't have a broadcast partner on board. Which is something I've never been able to pull off again, because I think right now the key thing is to have a streamer or a broadcast partner on board. I don't know how long that configuration is going to last, but for me personally, I see that that's currently, especially during this time of sort of economic uncertainty, it seems that the streamers are really the power players in terms of how we finance or model our package in terms of films and television. But yeah, I must say, like, despite all the hiccups, the South African government funding has really been a very, very, very key aspect of my career and in terms of raising funds for the films that I make. And I can go into more detail later.
I mean, I think it would be very informative for people, for us to kind of unpack what the differences are between a grant fund, kind of equity investment or venture capital investment, and also, some of the items on your financing plan which come from broadcasters, streamers, actually paying for your content, what those differences are. And then I think after we do that, I'd really like to take a Pan-African view from you, Lesedi, to talk about, when you're advising a production company that's working outside of South Africa, where there are less kind of grant or soft funding opportunities, what does that look like? So I'll start with you, Leila, if you could just maybe just outline for our audience the differences between these different types of funding.
Okay, so really currently in the South African model, the Department of Trade and Industries rebate has been the epicenter of our financing model. It's been a troublesome epicenter because I think what a rebate is supposed to essentially be is a rebate, which means you're supposed to get the money that you spent after you've made the film. However, our model relies on using that rebate as part of the production financing to make the film, which has its own challenges, and I can go into that a bit later. But the rebate essentially is free money. It's soft money. It's based of budget. So under the Emerging Black Filmmakers Incentive, it's 50% of your budget. And then in terms of the foreign production or co-productions, it's roughly between 25 and 35% of your budget. And that money is given to you either in milestones if you are bonded, and that means you have a completion guarantee from an entity such as Film Finance or Hollard, who ensure that the film will get made to the budget prescribed. And then they pay it out in tranches, and then you utilize that money to actually execute the production. Development Corporation is a development bank with a strong focus on developing young Black entrepreneurs. And they have a film and media unit or division. And they assess projects based on certain criteria. And therefore, the deals are usually structured based on what your movie or TV series is going to offer in terms of marketability, in terms of transformation, in terms of employment. They look at all of those aspects. And from there, they'll say to you, okay, we can go in with a venture capital loan, which is essentially a loan, which relies on you to make a certain amount of money back from your film's exploitation in order to repay that loan. And that's the first model, and that comes usually at a very high interest rate. So it's not the ideal model, but if it's a commercially viable product, they will definitely accept it, and it's money that's useful because they know it's being pumped back into the economy. And they also then go for equity. So on certain projects, which they're doing less and less now because of the high risk that film just basically proposes at the moment, the equity portion is that they will then take equity in your film. So they then participate in the profit of your product later on. So they'll get their money back, but subsequently they will also then recoup and share with you as the producer and owner of the content with whatever the film makes forever in perpetuity. And then the National Empowerment Fund is similar. However, their focus is specifically on uplifting Black economic empowerment and looking at a film, which is ultimately a business and ultimately a vehicle to promote employment. Their model works similarly to the IDCs. However, their interest is a little bit less, and they are subsidized by the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. So, for example, if they're giving you 10 million, 5 million of that will come from the department and has like a 2% interest rate, whereas the rest of the interest rate is at prime plus 2 or something like that. So all of these deals are structured very specifically based on the product that you're making. And it requires a lot of negotiation, a lot of understanding of business, and a lot of understanding of what your product hopes to achieve in terms of revenue. And then the NFVF, I'm sure everyone else can speak about here, and we can go into broadcasters a bit later, but that's the ultimate difference. Soft funding, there's a lot of international grants. On our first film, we also did use the World Cinema Fund, which is run by the Berlinale, and that is also a grant. So grant is the ideal because you don't have to pay it back or be in debt for the rest of your life. But yeah, there are lots of options out there. I think it's really just about understanding what is suitable for your product.
We love a good grant. Lesedi, can you talk about kind of the funding landscape and how it looks like for producers working outside of South Africa?
South Africa. Yeah. It's actually, it's quite bleak in the countries that I've been working with. And I'll speak specifically about Uganda because, I spent some time there last year and a little bit this year on the project that I'm working on. And, there's no government grants for the film industry. There are no private grants for the film industry. Beyond that, there are also very limited distribution channels in terms of where your film can go. So a lot of the way that these films then get funded, and specifically if I'm looking at nonfiction and potentially even with fiction, is that they're reliant on European and North American granting bodies who have kind of earmarked money specifically for African filmmakers because they've noticed that there's a gap in there, right? What becomes really difficult is, from a South African perspective, is that, there are no treaties between South Africa and a lot of the other African countries. So trying to be able to unlock money from South Africa becomes very difficult if you don't have a director who's South African or a writer who's South African. But I know that there's movement in that direction. So what we have looked at doing is working on who's our audience. So if the audience is, yes, we want the audience in Uganda, but what's the access? The audience is international, diaspora, Ugandans. So what we've done is we started to chart how we can work on a crowdfunding model with diasporans, Ugandan diasporans in English-speaking countries. But so that's the one part. The grants that are available for African filmmakers are also really, really fantastic that there is money that's earmarked for it. But the process of application, the process of having to wait, if there's rejections, if there's acceptance, also means that, for producers that are working with temperamental directors is that you actually have to then try and balance kind of making sure that the director still has the energy to be able to direct what they need to direct. So I think from an African perspective, it's very difficult. And I think that's where programs, I mean, from a curatorial perspective, having spoken to you, Tiny, around STEPS and Generation Africa, that kind of thing becomes important, because then you're able to like aggregate all the funds and be able to say, okay, there's 30 films from the African continent that can come out of this. The filmmakers don't have to worry about, is there internet, is there access? I mean, Uganda at the beginning of this year, there's a lot that we couldn't do because the president just cut off the internet. So even if we wanted to get on with stuff, it was just virtually impossible. The other way that I've noted is a lot of filmmakers in other African countries also hold citizenship in Western countries. So what ends up happening is that you could have a Cameroonian film, you could have a Ugandan film, but figure out like, is the director or one of the producers, do they hold a British citizenship? Do they hold American citizenship, Canadian citizenship? So that we can try and access those funds, even if we're calling it an African film. But unfortunately, if there isn't money that's earmarked on the African continent specifically for cinema, then you're heavily reliant on the slots that are available with the internationally earmarked funds. So we're still trying to figure it out. And it would be great to also hear from the NFVF, because I don't know what plans they are in terms of being able to bridge this gap. But even as a programmer, trying to find suitable African films becomes very, very difficult unless you go to partner organizations that are producing in bulk the way STEPS would be doing.
So now you're putting me on the panel. I will resist. So Lesedi,
I'm just telling the truth.
We're going to dovetail to Refilwe, because we're going to have a bunch of questions to ask her about NFVF funding, how to get in there, how to make opportunities happen. But there's something interesting that you and Leila talked about that I'd just like to unpack for a short while, and that is the notion of audiences. I'm really interested, for the sake of producers who are working on their funding package and looking to make projections about like sales projections, but for film, which would be kind of like audience figures, which help you to bring in the table people like IDC who are interested in hard numbers as a motivation for getting into the films. And I'm going to start with the NFVF, because you guys have a kind of survey of all the films that have been made in South Africa and can talk about our audience figures and how filmmakers are able to make those projections. I'll start with you, Nombuso, and then I'd like to come to you, Leila, in terms of how do you structure that in a proposal to IDC or someone like that. So my question to you, Nombuso, is audience figures for South African content. How is that looking, and how can filmmakers position themselves? What are the things that filmmakers who've been successful with audiences done to position themselves to attract South African audiences in the cinema and in other ways?
I think there's an opportunity to learn more about this particular space. And I'll give you a practical example. Films that do very well in box office normally tend to be your rom-coms. But funny enough, if they're international films, anything almost goes. So I think the bigger concern comes from us being receptive of the work that we do locally. And it's a combination of us marketing the work that we do so that we create a similar type of excitement that you'd have about Bad Boys as you would about Knuckle City. So you'll find that people are pre-planning to go see an international box office cinema movie, but that excitement is not cascaded sufficiently when it's a South African movie. And we don't quite know why there's that discrepancy or why the excitement is not the same. So I think there's a lesson to be learned on how we market. It goes also to say with last year, the numbers were pretty low because COVID happened, but it doesn't mean that the productions we could have churned are not great ones, but production houses were closed. But I really foresee an opportunity in us partnering with production houses and producers to make sure that we create sufficient excitement so that by the time we hit box office, people are eager and hungry to see the work that we have to do. And it also goes to how we as the film industry portray ourselves. So we tend to sell ourselves not as great as we are. I'll give you an example of movies from Nigeria. I've found myself watching Nigerian movies that I don't understand half the language they're speaking, but I sit there and watch it the whole time until it's finished, and I look forward to the next one. What is it that they're doing that compels me to sit in front of my screen that long that we're not doing? And research is probably going to assist us getting to understand the realities of what we need to do to make sure that we attract sufficient eyeballs to watch the movies that we produce. I do not personally think there's anything wrong with the quality of work that we do. I also don't see anything that won't work with genres, because in some instances you'll be told if you do a horror movie, people won't like it. I've seen, like, I think it's called Eight, a movie that I saw in Bioscope. And everybody seemed to enjoy it as much as people will make you think certain genres don't work. So another additional work in research that we need to do is understanding is the relevance of genres based on the regions where we stay, or is it about educating people what it means, how to get that excitement? But there is lots of groundwork opportunities that we have to make sure that the films that we make and the great films that we make get the traction that's required.
So, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought up Nollywood, because one can argue that Nollywood is an industry that grew out of a distribution infrastructure rather than a film funding infrastructure. That is to say, Nollywood was first and foremost a bunch of traders in the market distributing DVDs. It was less about funding filmmakers to make films, but rather getting hold of intellectual property, each of them distributing it. So then you could argue that Nigeria is able to monetize their industry because their distribution infrastructure is very scary, but also like very effective, if you get what I mean. So where I'm going with this question, Nombuso, is within the kind of future plans of the NFVF, is there any plan? Because if you say it's about positioning, then what you're saying is that it's about building a distribution infrastructure, supporting distribution companies, training and facilitating the skills development of distribution experts, sales experts, and people who can be specializing in that, which isn't there in South Africa. I think there's only a handful of distributors in South Africa whose income mostly comes from aggregating content to online platform. It does not come from proper, really distributing content within our market. So is there any plans within the future plans of the NFVF to support the growth of that sector in the film industry?
The first initiative that we have going on is a marketing and distribution funding. So
Okay.
you're able to produce your movie, and when you complete, ideally, please talk to us before you finish it. And when you're close to completion, you can talk to us about opportunities to market and distribute your film. And it's not necessarily two separate things, but the way you market, you can get a distribution partner on board, or you could rely on festivals to drive your penetration of the movie. And the way we market also, we do sometimes find ourselves reading proposals that are very relevant to the target market. You can see this is targeted for people in Limpopo. This is where the movie will be distributed, and it works perfectly for that target market. But we also get to see that there are opportunities where we can improve on how the proposals are written. And when I go to present at festivals, I always say, get an expert to assist you when it comes to writing a strategic marketing plan to make sure your movie gets there. If you're a filmmaker, you're not compelled to know about that element. You can get an expert who knows how to handle it. And then the second part of what we do, we host workshops where we try and increase education and opportunities for people to be able to distribute their movies. How we can assist is with festival hosting. So you may produce a short film that you know might never make it to box office, but you'd be able to reach festivals. And festivals for us are in every region, from Vicksburg to Khayelitsha and Cape Town. People are always requesting funding for festivals. And when they host festivals, they showcase locally made productions that you may not ideally see. So we also encourage movie makers not to be one-track minded into thinking, I can only do it at cinema, but they can find ways to get to other spaces, local and international festivals. We can even assist in getting sure that they go to market their products abroad in other festivals that occur. So there is opportunities to probably improve on the education part and probably to create a lot more excitement about people looking beyond just cinema. But we do have a vested interest in seeing the distribution grow beyond just the 5 distribution companies you spoke about.
Lesedi, would you like to kind of jump in on this, especially with your background in exhibition, particularly around festivals? It would be interested to know about what comments you have about the distribution infrastructure in South Africa.
Well, the thing with festivals is that festivals are, they're great platforms in terms of having filmmakers have space for their work to be exhibited, right? But there's also a barrier in terms of access because, film screenings are in certain neighborhoods, in certain cinemas. If a filmmaker, so if Leila comes and says my film can only be showed in DCP, then there's only very specific cinemas that we can show her film in, right? So I think that's the one thing. But what I also wanted to contribute to was, I know filmmakers in 3 different African countries in terms of distribution, when you're speaking about Nigeria's distribution, who actually went and formed partnerships with people in the piracy industry, because those people have access to everybody, right? More people than any festival on the continent can have any Alliance Francaise screening. So what they do, because they charge for their DVDs, so they'll go and say, okay, here's my film. I'd like 5% of whatever your earnings are from there. So that way you ensure the audience numbers in terms of how many people have access to it, and the filmmaker is able to make some money on the back end of their film. But I think the systems in South Africa are also very different. I can see Sis Nombuzo is like, what? Piracy? But, that's what happens. There's no cinemas in these places. There's rarely any festivals. For the most part, when people are looking in Sub-Saharan Africa for festivals, they look to South African festivals. So whether it's GiF or the Joburg Film Festival or Encounters in terms of where they can show their films, or the international festivals that have very few slots for African films. And most of the slots, and of course Afrif in Nigeria as well. And the slots that the international festivals have, they're looking for very experienced producers and directors, because if you only have 3 slots for African films, let it be a film that we can bring in. So I'm not sure, I don't 100% have an idea of how we can kind of figure out how we reach the mass audiences in South Africa. But for now, one of the most difficult things as a festival programmer here is the fact that the majority of people in terms of the demographics just don't have access to the cinemas, and you've got to consider parking and being able to get a ticket. So in terms of demographics, most of the times when the cinemas are packed, it's, you'll find it's probably people over the age of 50, 55, disposable income, living in certain neighborhoods who can actually buy 5 tickets at 120 rands per ticket for a film. But I'm not sure how we actually start to access the majority of people around the country. And I think what COVID has done in terms of being able to have these festivals online is that it potentially has been able to widen the audience, because, I can pay for my ticket and watch it from home. And I don't have to do all the additional extras of the popcorn and the parking and try and figure out, if I have a family, how much money I'm going to spend on it. So it's going to be interesting to see how these hybrid events start to take form and what kind of access there is. I also found that specifically when programming South African films in South Africa, the conversations that you have with the filmmakers are very important, because the filmmakers have the networks of people that will come to the cinema more than what you can do on radio or what you can do in the newspaper. So the relationships that the distribution channels and that the festivals have with filmmakers is very, very important, to also be able to understand, okay, fine, Leila's got this film, to say, okay, who's your ideal audience? So that if as a programmer, I'm going to go on to interviews, I can structure my PR plan to be like, okay, Leila says this is the audience, so I need more community radio stations, more than the commercial radio stations. But I've been very impressed with the 3 filmmakers who have been able to actually earn some money from making deals within the piracy space.
Sounds very ambitious and scary as a venture to go to. But Leila, speaking as a producer who works in safe and tidy South Africa, I mean, most producers are told that the time to get into conversations with a distributor and a sales agent is just as you're building your project package. Firstly, I wanted you to just tell me if that's the way that you go about doing it. And then secondly, to find out, as a South African producer, when you're making your projections to include in your financing plan, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think like as I'm listening to everybody as well, we really do have a lot of work to do as an industry. And I think we are in our infancy. As optimistic as I love to be about being a producer, it's absolutely heartbreaking, soul shattering in its current guise, because for in our sector and in our sectors, we're always on the back foot. Can you guys hear me? Sorry, everything just froze.
Yep. Yeah, we have some connection issues, but just keep going on, yeah?
Okay, yeah. So to give you a sense of what I mean, yes, we have to look at the production avenues. We have to look at the development avenues, which are also severely underfunded. We have to look at the distribution models, which in South Africa specifically, there's almost no options. There really are just a handful. And there's no money for marketing. The industry or the value chain as a whole needs to be further investigated and interrogated. And the future filmmakers that are coming up really should not have to go through the pain and agony that it is to actually produce a product. But for me, one of the biggest lessons that I learned, my first film required a sales agent, an international sales agent, to be attached in order to access the. And that turned out to be a very traumatizing experience for us, because we had virtually no name in the industry really at large in terms of marketability and commercial success. And so we were only able to attach a kind of a sales agent that was willing to take such a risk, and ultimately wasn't the kind of sales agent that could then propel the film forward in the ways that it needed to be propelled, or who didn't have the resources themselves or connections themselves to get the films to the places that we wanted them to be. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, because you're already on the back foot as a novice filmmaker or producer, and then you're only able to attach novice sales agents or distributors, and thus the product doesn't go in the successful heights that you hoped it would go. So for me, it really is, as Nombuso was saying, as Lesedi was saying, distribution is ultimately what I've learned, the absolute key aspect of how you tailor make your product and how you look at what it is you want to be and where you want to position yourself. And that's something I just wanted to add to that, is it's really a crucial time at the moment as a filmmaker or content creator to understand exactly where you place yourself and exactly who you want to be. Because it's actually a very different avenue or trajectory if you are hoping to win a Palme d'Or versus if you are hoping to direct the next Avengers, or if you are happy doing a telenovela that's widely successful and massively accessible to the larger masses. Those are very different avenues and require very different models, I think. I think we, in our infancy as an industry, we've kind of bundled filmmaking all together. And really, there are different strategies, there are different outcomes, and there are different models to work with. And those models put together build a successful sector.
Super. So I just want to give everyone the heads up that you can send questions via the chat function, the kind of old school chat function, that there's also a Q&A section, and our colleagues at Girls in Film will be kind of aggregating those questions and sending the relevant ones to me. And I will start answering those at the top of the hour or earlier if we run out of things to talk about. Now, I know most of you have put this event on your diary because you want to hear from the National Film and Video Foundation about, one, funding opportunities that are there at the National Film and Video Foundation, and two, how to write your proposal so that you get that money. So, Refilwe, Joy, please turn your mic on because now is your time, please. Firstly, maybe if you could just run us through the production and development and production funding opportunities that are there with the National Film and Video Foundation. I would also be interested in knowing about either funding opportunities which are relevant to production, such as archive, post-production funding, and so on. If you could just run us through what those opportunities are first.
Cool, no problem. So just in terms of development funding, just a broad definition is obviously if you come to the foundation with a concept and you basically want to see the project through until you've got a script or an outline, that's when you come for development funding. So we give development funding for fiction projects as well as non-fiction, which is documentary. So you can either apply for funding to make a short film, a feature film, if you're looking to develop a television concept. Yeah, so that's basically development funding. Everything's got a cap that you can find on our website. But I think, yeah, we obviously work within a budget at the beginning of the year. So to make sure that we, allocate to as many filmmakers as possible, we have to sort of cap it at a certain point. So for projects that are documentaries, we cap it at 180,000, and then for fiction feature films, we cap it at 200,000, and then for shorts, we generally cap it at 100,000. And then production funding, it's still the same. You can either then, so for production funding, either, so our production funding is inclusive of development, of post-production funding. So if you apply for instance, for 1.8 million for feature films, for instance, then we expect that you go into production and then as well as give us, various cuts of the films. Or you can come to the NFVF at the point at which maybe you've already shot the film and you are looking for funds just to finish it off. Archive funding is applicable for practitioners who are working on documentaries. Usually there's certain, snippets within the news and things like that that basically will elevate the film. So you'll go to those different bodies that have archive. You'll go to the SABC, the BBC, all of these different entities, and they'll basically give you quotations to say that 2 minutes of Mandela walking across this bridge is X amount, and then you come to the NFVF and then we basically give you funding to sort of bridge that gap. For production funding, it's the same. It's fiction, non-fiction. We also fund web series. We fund 2 to 3 part production episodes of television productions for documentaries. We fund made-for-TV movies. There are people who just want, those like Mzansi model kind of productions where, they aren't really very highbrow and very expensive. They're quick to do. They, 300 in the region of 300,000 to 400,000. They entertaining. They appeal to, a lot of people. So we do, make room for that type of funding as well.
Okay, and did you, yeah, okay, cool. In terms of the process of applying, what are the how do the cycles get announced? How can people know when the window for applying for funding with the NFVF is, and also how long it'll take for them to get feedback so that they can plan their productions? I don't know if I'm, yeah.
So basically, from a production and development perspective, we open 3 cycles a year. So usually the cycles, there'll be 1 cycle. The first cycle is usually the longest, but usually from start to finish, the cycles are usually around 3 months. So the call will open for a period of around 4 weeks. That will get announced on the NFVF website, on industry pages, as well as NFVF social media pages. So it's important to follow those. And then basically you'll be given like a call with all of the information of what it is that's needed to, that you need to basically attach to each application. So we've got different phases, obviously, of evaluation. So all of those applications that come in after the poll closes will go to our applications team, who basically check compliance to make sure that Tiny has attached every single document that was requested. And then it will go to a different phase where we then take it to a panel of industry experts who will then read each application in depth. They'll basically have a meeting, I think, after a month to then discuss the merits of each project. And then it will go to our council for final approval of which projects are going to get funding and which ones aren't. So I think in general, just in terms of just to give an overview of what then gets looked at by the panel, I think it is information that's already on our website, but obviously this is a great opportunity to then just punt and remind everyone that, you know, when an application comes in, basically it's a basket of things that gets looked at. So we look at the concept. You know, how original is this concept? You know, is it unique? I think living in a time like we're living in, we're all socially connected right now. Top of mind, everyone's talking about the pandemic. So naturally we'll get 50 applications that are about the pandemic, and COVID. So I think the one thing that people always need to think about is, how do I make my project stand out from the next one? Yes, I might be touching on a certain subject, but like, where's the entry point? How do I discern this project from the next one? Because I can watch the news and find the content. I can read News 24 and find the content. So am I, telling it from the perspective of, someone who's disenfranchised? Am I telling a personal story? Like, it all depends on what makes it unique. So I think that's one thing that needs to be considered. We look at your motivation. This is especially important for the new practitioners. I think a lot of people gloss over it. But I think it is important, especially because we're trying to, open up the industry for as many people as possible to understand why you are telling this film, why you specifically, what's relevant about this film, and why it needs to be told right now, and why you are the vehicle to tell this film. We look at things like structure, in a sense that, do you have a basic understanding of, films, beginning, middle, and end? Doesn't have to follow the classic 3-act structure from Hollywood, because I think we are in Africa, and, we have to be alive to the fact that there's different ways to tell films. But do you understand the basic concept of film? We look at characterization. Are you telling this film from, very interesting and dynamic characters? We look at things like, do you understand, the target audience? Because if you have an intimate understanding of your target audience, then it's easy to sort of convince the panel. But I think from your end, you need to have a very clear understanding of who this film is made for. Not every film will appeal to every single South African aged 13 to 60. Some films are made for people who are living in a certain township. So do you understand that? Do you understand how to then access those people? We look at things like your budget, if it's appropriate. And then we look at things like, obviously, your CVs and things like that of the team. Yeah. about it.
Tiny, oh, you're on mute. But I just
Classic
want-
on mute, please excuse me. I'm back with my mic on. Rufino, can you talk about slate funding? I know that the NFVF has had certain slates. How often do you announce slates? What are the kind of producers you're looking to work for in slates, and how does the whole slate funding thing work?
So what slate funding is, slate funding basically is sort of to make sure that you have cornerstone financing, as it were. So there's fiction slates and there's the non-fiction slates. So for the fiction slates, you get a certain amount of money. It's 6 million at the moment. We are obviously looking to revise and see how to, up the budgets. But, the deliverable there would be over a period of 3 years. You produce 9 projects in development, and then 3 of them need to go into production. So the budget is quite tiny, but I think the nice thing is that for another funder who's looking to jump on board, they at least know that you do have some sort of seed financing, and I think it's, the momentum of the fact that, it's not just one project, you don't have to sort of wait, for you to complete one film for it to do all the festival rounds. You sort of have like quite a lot of projects that are like in your pocket type of thing. So I think from a momentum point of view, there's safety in that regard. With documentaries, I think you do still have to produce 3 films, but you develop 6 concepts. So I mean, I think our idea is obviously to then, get other funders involved. We try and make sure that, with slate funding, we give them as much support as possible. We make sure that, broadcasters, financiers are always sort of abreast of like the projects that the companies are working on, just so that, everyone can sort of like jump on board as early as possible. We also have the female filmmaker project and the youth filmmaker project. So this opportunity, basically the companies that we look for facilitating companies who can basically then so the output of that is that at the end of 3 years, there'll be 30 short films that are made. So basically it's empowering a tier 2, like a emerging company, to basically run a program where we get new practitioners in.
So we've lost Refilwe there, and I'm going to make a note of what she was talking about, and we'll come back to that, because I would still like to talk about international co-production with her in terms of the processes and the approaches, firstly what they fund, as well as how you go about certifying your production as an international co-production in order to open up other opportunities in the South African funding landscape for those who want to work with us here in South Africa. But I want to maybe just kind of take a break and go somewhere else with the conversation that we're having. I know that you have another 7 minutes to go with us, Leila. So I want to take advantage of your still being around, if that's okay with you, to just kind of jump to a question that is going to draw you into the conversation, and maybe you can come back after your commitment at 7 to kind of catch Q&A questions, and I'll save your Q&A questions for that time. I mean, you've been quite generous in kind of sharing with us the different kind of funding opportunities that are there in the South African landscape. But I wanted to ask you about what advice you can give as a producer about writing strong funding proposals. what kind of proposals that you've written that you felt have been really strong. I want to ask the same thing from you, Lesedi, because you've been kind of supporting filmmakers in writing proposals that have really helped them to kind of gain international attention. I know that your project that you are advising in Uganda was at Sheffield last year, and the proposal was really strong. So let's start with you, Leila. Like, what is kind of your approach to working? And I know that when you're a producer, you're not the only one writing the proposal. It really comes down to your talent as well. So please, let's talk about what goes into a strong funding proposal. We'll come back to you, Refilwe, and welcome back.
What I think is just also interesting to understand is that often, and I started out as being inherently an artist, like all I wanted to do was be an artist. And it's taken me quite some time to educate myself really on what the business of film and television is, because ultimately it's a business. And we have this kind of perception that the people who are put in place to finance films don't want to finance films, but they really do. Like the NFVF really has a budget to target. They really want to give the funds to the filmmakers, but it comes down a lot of the time to the applications and the quality of the proposals of what the content is. So for me, my ultimate advice has always been, if you achieve what you're meant to in terms of the application process for funding, if you make a strong business case for your product and you understand every facet of what it means to make a film or television series, and you are able to communicate that in your endeavor to raise finance for it, half of your job is already done. But I find that we are very undereducated in terms of what is accessible to us as producers in terms of finance, and also how to access those funds. So for me, education has always been a really, really key thing, understanding and educating myself as much as I can. I went to the IDC, I requested an in-person meeting. I did the same thing in the beginning with the NFVF, the same thing with the DTI, and the same thing with the NEF. And I'm not saying that the opportunities are just like rolling out there. It's really tough being a film producer at the moment. However, it's really, really important to make sure that on your end, whatever content you're putting forward, you understand exactly what that content is intended for and exactly what opportunities are available to you for that specific kind of content. So for me, really, in application phase it's so important. The panelists that are adjudicating most of these projects, whether they come from a business background or a film and narrative structure background, they can tell if you know what you're doing. They can tell if you've informed yourself enough to understand and display that you have the ability to take millions of rands and execute and deliver a product that ultimately costs a lot of money. So without going into too much detail, both on the front of the broadcasters, of Netflix, of Mnet, which is our two big major players here, as well as government funds, it's crucial to understand exactly what it is you are doing beyond just having a story to tell. Because the story to tell is the core and the heart of why we do everything that we do. But our stories that we tell, they cost a lot of money to execute properly. And I think more education, more understanding, more really informing yourself of every aspect and facet of what it is to be a producer or to make and execute a production is really important. And for me, it has been about honing the skills of being able to apply for funds and really, really, really learning from the mistakes. I mean, I've been declined so many times. And then I take from that and I go, okay, what did I do wrong here? What didn't make sense to those particular people? So yeah, packaging your product before you've even started developing it or started going into it, understanding from beginning to distribution is essential, because I think people will invest in your ideas if you understand what you're asking for.
So what I'm hearing you here say is that you must understand very intimately what the story you want to tell. It must be very well researched, and then you must have the discernment to choose the most important and critical parts of your project out of that deep level of research when it comes to narrative structure and story, and when it comes to the business elements, and putting that in the proposal.
Yeah, completely. And I think going through what everybody requires. I mean, it's okay to also do a full Netflix commission, because you're going to take your money as the producer or director from the budget of the film, and that film is going to be released and owned by an independent broadcaster like Netflix. But if that's the model that you want to go with, understand what's required for that particular model. So yes, I feel like education and packaging is essential, and it's been what I've been learning the most.
Your thoughts, Lesedi?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Layla's saying, and I want to just add from a person who has sat on adjudicating panels. But so the one thing I think, and some of these things sound really basic, but I don't know that most of the successful applications, the applicant has actually answered the questions that are being asked. So every application comes with a treatment, this is what we want from the treatment. A synopsis, this is what we want from the synopsis. So a basic thing is just start off by answering the questions, right? Don't just go off on a tangent about your story. So that's the first thing. The second thing is check who this organization has funded before. Just some basic, like, who have they funded in whatever fiscal period, so that you can also check, is this the right fit for my film? Is this the right fit for what this grant giving organization or this financial institution gives? And then the third thing is to understand that as much as your film is important to you and you've worked on it and you love it and this is your baby, most organizations have a finite number of slots that they can fund. So let's say in any given cycle, you can fund 30 films and you've received 600 applications. Those 30 films, it's not to say you could have 100 of those 500 films be great and excellent, but you can only still pick 30. So a rejection is also not an invitation to slit your wrists and to send nasty emails to people. If you know and you feel you've answered the questions. And as somebody who has sat on a number of these adjudicating panels, you'll sit sometimes with between 100 to 150 proposals. And you'll start off by saying, okay, if they've asked for a 2-page synopsis and an 8-page treatment, and you've decided to send a 20-page treatment, I'm going to read it later. Because already I'm like, you haven't followed what's been asked for, right? Which means that, like, if you then get greenlit for a grant, will you be able to follow or to even manage the money of the grant that you've been given? So I think in tandem to what Layla has said, those are the other things that I would add. And really, if you just look at the application, then make sure that you've answered each and every question, and that on whatever it is that they've asked for, when you look at your application, you say, oh, okay, I see I'm missing this. Then you also have an opportunity to explain why you're missing that. So the reader just has a clear, concise docket to be able to work with. And I think for a lot of the directors in the room, it's to also be able to trust your producer, because your producer is in charge of selling this, right? So the final film is your film, but the producer might also be able to have the language to be able to say, okay, what do people who may or may not be in the industry who are reading this, what kind of language do they need to be able to understand it? So if you're going to have a whole lot of industry jargon and technical terms, you have to always think that the reader on the other end might actually not know what you're talking about. So it's to trust your producer in saying, okay, this is what my intention is with the film. Can you assist with writing this package? Because what you're trying to do is to get money. The film will be made. What you're trying to do is to get money. And when you're speaking to people who have money, there's a certain language that you need to be able to deliver in your application.
That's a tough sell there, Lesedi. Trust your producer. I want to come back to you. I want to come back to you, Refilwe. You were talking about slate funding before you got disconnected. I wanted to know if there's any final remarks you have about slate funding, and then I have 2 more questions to ask you.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure where I got cut off. But I think just in general, slate funding is for emerging companies. So those are companies who've probably made like 1 or 2 feature films. or have worked a lot in the television space, or have done, you know, quite a number of short films. Because I think what happens is that, you know, we've got a lot of like emerging filmmakers, and we're all sort of like vying for the same pot of money. So the idea with Slate funding is basically to just elevate them to the next level where, you know, they can be having those conversations with international funders, you know, to say that this is my body of work, this is, you know, what I've done to date. And yeah, so in terms of Slate funding, I mean, that is an opportunity that's only available like once every 3 years, because there is a finite amount of projects that we can take on. But I think for anyone that is on this call, we are going to be opening up for the female filmmaker project and the youth filmmaker project slates around June, so you can have a look out for that. And then the animation slate, we are going to then be opening that up either this year or early next year.
Super. Thank you, Refilwe. My next question is around international co-production. To find out what are the circumstances in which you are able to offer development or production funding for an international co-production? And then secondly, to find out from you, what is the process? Because I know that the NFVF is responsible for certifying an international co-production as an official co-production under our treaties that exist. What is the process for getting that done for filmmakers? And what comes first, the application for funding or the application for co-production certification? The horse and the cart.
Okay, so so South Africa's got treaties with a couple of countries. It is usually, I mean, a lot of them are countries obviously in the West. So you've got your Canadas, your Germanys, your UKs, those countries. I think the idea is obviously to foster relationships between different countries, so that, you know, in South Africa, your South African producers can, you know, get funding from your DTIs and your NFVFs, and then your co-producer then is also able to sort of access the rebates in their country, so that you can then collaborate and do the project together. In terms of so basically, usually it depends. Usually a lot of them will come and certify, or some will apply for funding. It just depends on how far a project is. Some people are able to sort of like do development by themselves. We've got a specific project between NFVF and CMF, which is the Canada Media Fund, and that's specifically looking to foster relationships for television projects where you'll be given 400,000 from the NFVF and then 400,000 from CMF, where we sort of then, two different companies will then come together and, you know, work on a television project that can then work in this market and in the next market. So I mean, I think with all of the opportunities, the festivals and everything else, the one thing that we do try make sure and foster is having people like access these rebates and work with internationals, because I think in South Africa, obviously there is a very limited amount of funding that's available. I think, you know, it's great in terms of creatively to be able to, you know, work on a project that's also sort of like being done with other filmmakers from different countries, but also being able to like leverage from their sort of funding pools on their end.
And then in terms of the process of certifying a film as a co-production in order to allow it to have access to It's a rebate, yeah, the co-production rebate from DTI and so on. How does that process work? And when should filmmakers aim to do that? Is it before they start with the funding application with you guys, or is it after?
They can do it before they put in the funding application. So we do have a monitoring and evaluations manager, Terence Kumalo, which is Terence K at nfvf.co.za. So he is basically the person to contact, just in terms of the certification. He'll send you all of the documentation that you need to fill in and make sure that it's compliant, and then obviously see the process through.
Okay, super. All right, it's the top of the hour, and I'd really like to now move to some of the questions that have come in from the audience. Some people will note that I kind of touched on your questions during the course of my bit of the prepared conversation. So if I don't get to your question, it might be because I feel that we've addressed it. So I'll just start, and I'm sorry I won't be able to quote names because I'm not reading from the Zoom application, but one of the questions that came from the audience is, are there things in the National Film and Video Foundation? Sorry, before I actually go to the Q&A, I've just realized you guys have a call out in a collaboration with the Netflix streamer in Africa for micro-budget film funding. Before we take any questions from the audience, I think it's really important that we address that opportunity. Can you tell us more about that opportunity, please, Refilwe, and how filmmakers can access that opportunity?
Okay, so yes, NFVF has an opportunity with Netflix. I think it was just born out of the need to resuscitate the industry. You know, the arts has been very hard hit with COVID. I mean, if you look at just the box office report from 2019, we had 22 films from South Africa. Last year, we only had 6, you know, so there's been a lot of stagnance, a lot of projects got halted, others got cancelled altogether. So I think what's really been volatile is people being able to sort of get their finances in order. So, you know, sometimes you maybe might get, you know, a little bit of funding from KZN Film Commission or from NFVF, but then you really struggle to sort of like lock all of those finances together and go into production. So basically this opportunity is for projects that are ready to go into production. So it's projects that have like complete scripts, that have, you know, complete teams. So it is unfortunately at the moment an opportunity just for fiction projects. I think the streamer did advise that those are the ones at the moment that seem to be that seem to get more traction than documentaries, but obviously this is still it's a pilot phase, so we'll see, you know, how it goes over the years. But basically the opportunity then allows for whoever gets selected to get 100% of their budget. So there are projects where you can make a feature film for 6 million. So those are for filmmakers who are a little bit more advanced. You either have to have made like 2 feature films that have been theatrically released or more. And then there is funding at 4 million, which is for those individuals who've either then maybe have worked maybe on one theatrically released feature film, or have worked in shorts or television or even graduates type of thing. So I think number one, it is a micro budget. Obviously the budgets aren't very big, but the idea is, you know, to, you know, make it contained, but, you know, still keep it compelling, make sure that, you know, there's, you know, cultural authenticity, but, you know, global appeal. I think a big driver of this project is to also try to find new emerging voices. I think we have seen from some of the people that Netflix has, some of the companies that Netflix has worked with, is that, you know, once you sort of have your foot in the door, then, you know, more opportunities sort of come about. So yeah, that's that project. Not sure if I have covered it.
I've got more questions about that, because just one more actually.
Yeah.
The definition of micro budget varies worldwide. And I think the international understanding of what a micro budget is and what a micro budget is in South Africa is different, particularly because there's been just over a decade of micro budget filmmaking that has been very severely underfunded. And I'll say that without calling out any particular platforms as such. So I think it's very pertinent to ask, what is the cap on this micro budget opportunity? How do you guys, in collaboration with Netflix, define micro budget?
Okay, so I mean, monetarily.
Yes,
okay.
How much is your micro budget cap?
Okay, so like I said, these are feature films that are either between 80 to 120 minutes running time. So there is a pool of funding for your emerging new filmmakers, which is capped at 4 million. And then for your more advanced filmmakers, that's then capped at 6 million. So, sorry?
Is this per film?
Yes, per film. So we're looking to fund 2 films that are at the 6 million mark, and then 4 films that are at the 4 million mark. So it is quite competitive. We have gotten hundreds and hundreds of applications already. Yeah, and I think another important thing to note is that the call does close on the 7th of May. So if you haven't started your application, I'd really encourage you to just at least start the process. You can save along the way, but to at least just sort of get a sense, like Lesedi was saying, to see what it is that's required, because I think that's the most important thing out the gate, to make sure that you sort of meet all of those compliance requirements.
I thought you were going to say, if you haven't started the application, just take a seat. So I'm happy you're encouraging people.
No, no.
All right. That is all in terms of the prepared questions. And I'm sorry to be eating into the time of the Q&A. I hope people will be happy to stay another 15 minutes to stay in the conversation with us. The first question that comes from the audience is, are there things the NFVF would like to see more of? And also, there's a second question that says, are there common mistakes the NFVF see in applications? That's for you, Refila, both from the same person. Are there things that the NFVF would like to see more, types of stories, types of applicants? And then also, are there any common mistakes that you can think of off the top of your head to advise people to steer clear of?
Okay. I think there is no formula. I'm sorry, I know it sounds like such a cop-out. But I think, I mean, it's just good storytelling, you know, making sure that it's, you know, authentic, making sure that, you know, it's truthful. Yeah, I think, you know, unique. Just in terms of common pitfalls that we've seen, I think it is not following the guidelines. You know, I mean, there'll be small things where people don't attach the most recently certified ID, and then you've done all of this work to sort of like, you know, put your application together, and then it gets thrown out because of a technicality like that, you know. So I think the most important thing is to start your application early, because if you started early, then you can engage with people at the NFVF to say, hey, people maybe from the applications team, can you guys quickly just run through my application and let me know that, you know, I've filled in everything accordingly, and then, you know, we can sort of advise. But I think it becomes a little bit difficult if then everything sort of comes in night before or, 2 minutes before, and then there isn't enough time to sort of engage with anyone. I think outside of this Netflix opportunity that's available, we do have just the general funding for production and development, and that closes on the 23rd of May. So that's something that you should also be on the lookout for.
Thank you so much, Rafila. There's a question about how does one go about finding a distribution partner and how that works. We talked extensively in the first part of the conversation about the importance of distribution partners. We also mentioned that there are very few of them here in South Africa. I will kind of offer some advice, and I think that is to say that you think of finding a distribution partner as the way you go about finding the other type of collaborators in your film projects, like funders, which is to prepare a package and then approach a distribution partner with a package that explains the opportunities in your film. It also does involve a lot of festival travel if you're looking for distribution partners outside of the country. So I want to invite you, Nombuso, to speak about how filmmakers, and I could see you on your laptop, how filmmakers can unlock opportunities for traveling international festivals in order to meet potential distributors working from outside of the handful that are there in South Africa.
The simple answer is we post every single month for film attendees, for film festival attendance. So both market and festival attendance. So the best thing to do is to just apply on our website for the funding. International travel, I think, is capped at about 40K. Local travel also has its own cap. So there's a variety of people that apply. So we get people that apply because their films are in competition. There's people who apply because they're going out to look for opportunities. Others get invited either to be in panels or to come to an exhibition and get better exposure. So we adjudicate every entry as it comes. There's a motivation letter that you have to write that explains why you are requesting funding. And then there's a report that you do when you come back. So it's not rocket science at all. Ideally, we do encourage people to apply because it also grows the industry, which is our core objective, to grow the industry. So it's not at all complicated. But one thing I wanted to add on local applications with local distributors is that in instances where we do get distributors talking to us, or in instances where we're adjudicating applications for distribution, they always say in more than one time that engage distributors as early as possible. Engage them on what you're thinking, engage them of the genre that you're thinking, of the market that you're targeting, because they're able to give you direction and assistance to make sure what you do really works. So we did have a call last time for festivals happening in May. We should be having one in this month or early next month, in the month of May, for the rest of festivals that are happening. In some cases, we do share with you what festivals are happening. In most cases, people come to us already knowing exactly where they want to go and what they want to achieve, which is so amazing. Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Nombuso. There's a feature-length project. Is there anyone who'd like to give this question a go? Rafilwe, do you, when you receive a funding application for a feature film, which is already about a story which has already been made in the form of a short film, do you see this as a successful way to go about fundraising for a feature film?
Sorry, Tiny, I missed the first part. I was having bandwidth issues.
How does one use their short film as a tool to fund their feature-length project? I'm assuming here that she means a short film and a feature-length project about the same story.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, I think the reason why, so for tier 3 filmmakers who are new entrants, right, into the industry, we encourage them to do short films for this very reason, because then you can sort of use it as like a proof of concept to other funders to sort of show them that, okay, this is what I can do within like a limited budget, or, I think it's a lot of filmmakers have sort of internationally sort of used this model to then, you know, sort of use their short film to sort of go get and unlock other film finances. So yeah, I think it definitely is a great strategy. I think if you are maybe working backwards in terms of you've already got your feature film, then I think it's making sure that you choose those pivotal scenes and that, you know, obviously the story still makes sense from your feature film, and then sort of crafting your short film from there. But I think, yeah, no, it is a good model to follow.
Well, do you want to make a comment on this, Lesedi?
No, I think Refilwe has covered it, because for the most part, it also gives the reviewer and the funding organization an opportunity to see your work, to see your cinematic style, to be able to see how you can work and complete a project. But with that said, if your short film also just looks like a complete short film and you're just trying to extend it, then don't do that, right? make another film, because short films in and of themselves are a genre. You know, they're not meant to be a stepping stone, in the same way that, you know, there's filmmakers who also believe that I'm going to start with documentaries, then I'm going to go to fiction, and it shouldn't be yeah. You know, you should be able to perfect your craft in the way that it needs to be perfected. But I think to what specifically the NFVF is looking for, and I think the NFVF is very specific in what their requirements are. So if the NFVF says that for filmmakers that are coming in, it's better to have a short film that we can use, then you also know that, okay, with this funding body, this is how it works. But I don't think that it's a model to use when trying to raise money internationally, because there's short film festivals, there are filmmakers who are just shorts filmmakers. So if you're going with that kind of energy, you are going to hit a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that you kind of came with an angle here that I totally resonates with me. I'm totally on board with people who want to try their like documentary as a stepping stone to fiction, because it's a whole world of its own, with its own rules, with its own kind of trajectory of learning as a filmmaker as well. But I remember that Neil Blomkamp made a short film about whatever his film District 9 was about, really, first, and then he made District 9, but the film was very useful in helping him to fundraise and bring on partners for District 9. So, I mean, I am of the view that proof of concept is only a thing that's relevant for certain kinds of genre, like animation, like science fiction, and some comedies where the humor has to be explained in a certain kind of way, but that maybe it doesn't make sense for you to make a short film of a drama story and then want to make that into a long film. It's like, if it just like doesn't work. It's about, is there something that you need to demonstrate that is new in the kind of filmmaking that you're making, that is risky and groundbreaking? Then it makes sense for you to make a proof of concept, because it blows my mind. Like, I cannot understand it. But if it's, you know, a boy meets girl story, what are you proving in the proof of concept? So I just wanted to kind of add that in and chime in with that as well. So to move on from there, so there's a question about whether the NFVF funds non-South African citizens who are residing in the country legally. That's for you, Refilwe.
Okay. So if you do have residency documentation, if you have a South African production company, or if you've got citizenship and you know you've got all of the relevant paperwork, then you are more than welcome to apply.
Super. Then there's a question We've spoken about co-production grants, and I think that was a question from you, Lesedi. Then there's a question about how do filmmakers make money from their content? I'm not sure if we've not been kind of touching on that question throughout the conversation. Maybe if there's anything specific that you want to kind of come in with that, Nombuso, seeing as you deal with marketing and audience-facing kind of questions, if you can just quickly summarize how filmmakers make money from their content.
I was actually hoping Leila would answer that. She would know better than me. I am not that skilled in that space.
All right. You've looked at a lot of funding applications and financing plans. And I guess the financing point of the project is where you can kind of gather where the ideas for making the money for the film come from. Can we talk about monetization of content in this way, Refilwe, and then you, Lesedi, as well?
I'm assuming this is projects that are complete, right?
Yeah, I guess projects that are complete, but also maybe pre-sales. We can talk about pre-sales, sources for pre-sales.
I think, look, in terms of pre-sales, a lot of people would usually then go to your broadcasters for that sort of package. If you have a project that's already complete, you can license the film to your Netflixes, your SABCs, you know, all of these platforms. There are, please help me here. I know you can go to, for instance, when you get your content, like taken to like a SAA or I don't know the exact. Lesedi, please help here.
Yeah, airline.
Like airline distribution models. So there are various ways in which you can sort of like slice and dice it. Yeah.
I guess,
yeah.
I think the thing around you know, can you make the money, like with a complete film, with a complete product, making the money also looks like a profit over and above what your budget is, right? So I think it also depends on your budget. And I think as Tiny, you've mentioned, like we have been speaking about this, it's the access to the distribution channels. So if you've got a film that has, you know, a director who is of interest, whether they're first-time director, experienced director, then maybe international broadcasters would pick up on your film. And right now, I think in terms of being able to make money from your content, it's broadcasters. And following that, you've got the streamers. With the streamers, you also have to be able to check, because they'll want all the copyright, they'll want to be able to keep it all. So once they have it, you cannot diversify how you earn the money. But if your budget is low enough and Netflix comes to you and says, okay, this is what we'll give you for it, and you can see that you can make money, then great. But then you know that you can't give it to another broadcaster. So it's such a broad question that it's almost like it would be better for the person who's asking the question to kind of give something specific. Is it short form? Is it long form? Where are you also sitting in the world? Because, you know, in the last year and a half, what's really happened around diversity and inclusion and, you know, people wanting brown people all over the place is that there's an opportunity for that kind of content, right? So it also depends on the timing that you find yourselves producing this content. But by and large, in the absence of living and working on a continent where you can make money, we actually can go to an investor and say, okay, please, can you fund my film? And I can guarantee that I'll be able to get a profit from it. And you're reliant on the global north more often than not. It's, you know, you're gambling, you've got to be strategic. I think as everyone has spoken about on the panel, you've got to be able to say, okay, how do I invest in going to the festivals to meet distributors, to meet sales agents? How do you also sell your content in a way that makes sense? There's also alternative platforms that exist that we never really talk about. So the festivals and the Netflix and even some of the big broadcasters, people are watching content all over the place. So there's so many different ways to answer this, but I feel like I would be able to be more clearer if I knew specifically what's being asked, but
it's broad.
We can only but try, yeah, and it's quite broad. And I don't know in your experience, you're a producer as well.
From my experience, one of the things that I was thinking about, because a lot of the people in our audience are South African content makers, is that there is a tendency in South Africa to think only as far as the Limpopo in terms of who our content can actually speak to. And I think it's really important for South African producers, just speaking to that audience just now, to consider that there are millions of people on the African continent who are potential audiences for our films, for our content, for our stories, and that our films should be made to connect with a local story, but also to be something that can be universally kind of appealing. And I think, universally can be problematic because of just where we come from in terms of content making and distribution. But also, like, there are opportunities just within Africa to have your film versioned in Portuguese, to have your film versioned in French, to have your film versioned in Arabic, if it's the kind of story that can connect with an audience there. That while it's not something that's existing in practice so prevalently, but that there is a possibility for us as African producers to imagine all of these as territories. It's like, I think 28 countries in the continent who work and speak in English the way that we here in South Africa work and speak in English, if you understand what I mean. And about 5 or 6 countries in Portuguese. And so there are these opportunities. And I think that there's opportunities for South African content makers to monetize their content if we think outside of Mzansi. Leila is still not back. She could have said a lot around this, but we charge on. And then we're coming back to the conversation around applications with you, Lesedi. Someone asked, can Lesedi speak more to what is meant by the language of an application, and what should filmmakers be considering there when writing an application?
Sure. So I think in terms of language, what I'm speaking about is being able to, because you're selling something. So there's 2 different things. There's the creative process of the making of the film and the story, and even the script itself. So if you're applying for production funding, the script will tell the story and the treatment will tell the story. But before you even get to that, your synopsis should give us an overview. Your director's intention needs to also be in there, which then kind of brings us into who the director is, what draws the director to the story, and why the director is best suited and best placed to the story. There's the producer's intention, which is from a language perspective as well. What's the relationship that the producer has with the film and the subject? What is the relationship that the producer has with the director? So I think in terms of being able to answer what's being asked for, a lot of applications that I've read through that don't succeed is that from top to bottom, it's all very like jargony, artistic language. So there isn't any space for somebody to have background information on the film before even reading the script. The second part of the question, Tiny, sorry, can you just repeat the second part? Because I think I've only answered one part.
Yeah, that's it. That's the question. What do you mean by the language of the application? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just keeping things simple, like really keeping things simple. I think sometimes and it's natural. There's a natural instinct. So there's an exercise that I'll do with filmmakers who are applying for funding. So I'll read their application or their draft application, and then I'll sit and I'll ask them, what is your story about? What's your film about? And what are you trying to say? And there's a huge difference between what I hear when the person is speaking versus what I'm reading. So there's a natural tendency when we're writing to try and sound like what we imagine the reader wants us to sound like. So it's that in terms of language. And I found that in terms of that kind of exercise, illustrating to the filmmaker that you know your film, just speak about it. You know why you're making it. Just tell us why you're making it. You know why you're the director of it. Tell us what brings you to the story. Because you then get locked into language and into English that just is, it's terrorizing to read it. It feels like an act of, of terror and violence, but it's just that. And maybe that's an exercise you could get into, is to look at your application and then to say it out loud to somebody on your team or to a friend and see if the two things match. But the grant giving organization or the financing organization, all they want to know is simply, what story are you trying to tell? Why are you telling this story? And do you know who the audience is? And I think Refilwe had mentioned earlier, also again, in terms of the language that you put in there, is that, you know, people will write that their audience are between 16 and 59. And you're like, are you kidding me right now? Right? Like, well, what does that mean? You know? So also being specific. So when you're thinking about who your audience reach is, think about it in primary, secondary, and tertiary terms. So you can say my primary audience are these people. This is the class bracket. This is what they do. This is whatever their education level. The tertiary, the secondary audience is much broader, and the tertiary, so that the person who's reading can say, yes, this film can be accessible to everybody, but the applicant has actually kind of zoned in on who the primary audience is. Then the person from a marketing and distribution perspective can then be clear around like where this film can go and how to position the film. But yeah, just keep it simple and trust yourselves.
Another question around applications is, if the application is unsuccessful, this is for you, Refilwe, can the NFVF send feedback about why it was not successful as opposed to not responding?
So the NFVF does send feedback. So NFVF sends feedback automatically to tier 3 filmmakers who are obviously new practitioners, but even in your letter of outcome, it does say if you want reasons for why the project was unsuccessful, then you email this certain person. So I think also, more so, I think it's just an issue of how many people are at the NFVF versus how many applications come in. So the onus is on you to sort of then come back and say, can I please have my feedback? But it's readily available. Just as long as you come and ask for it, then you'll know how to then best improve for the next cycle that opens.
So there's a question here about what is the general take on filmmakers wearing multiple hats, like being the writer and director? Is it encouraged or discouraged, and why? I think this is a kind of a subjective question. So I'll just invite opinions from the panel, what you guys think about that.
I'm going to speak from a nonfiction perspective and not from a fiction perspective. From a nonfiction perspective, which is documentary, I think where you have a writer, director who can also do camera, sometimes the places that you're going into, the kind of access that you have, it doesn't work when there's a whole crew and a whole bunch of people, right? Your main characters might feel clammed up. So if you do have the skill and the talent, because it's also based on that, right? If you have the skill and the talent and you know that your story requires a small crew for you to be able to get what you need out of it for your film, then yes, you can double up. The level of experience also, I think you take into consideration, and also energy. So to write something takes energy, to direct something takes energy, to edit something takes energy. So you also need to figure out where to best apportion your energy and your skill and your gifts, quite frankly. And yeah, so that would be my contribution from a nonfiction perspective.
Rafila, you want to give us your view about this? Because I'd also like to say something. So.
No, I think I completely second what Lesedi is saying. I think, it also depends on the scope of the project. But I do think that we are in, a sort of space where a lot of people have to be able to, out of necessity, not out of wanting to, have sort of, been backed up to being able to be like, okay, I can shoot and then tomorrow I can edit the content. But, sometimes it is to the detriment of the project. So I think it is important, where possible, to collaborate and, empower other people to sort of, not do this Tyler Perry thing, because we don't all do it well.
I mean, he doesn't do it well, but that's my view. But actually, what I was going to say, Rafila, I think is the last bit of your contribution, is that film is a collaborative medium for a reason. I think collaboration adds value to a film. So often I discourage a director to edit their own film because they've been sitting with this idea. They're very precious about certain things that might not work. They also make assumptions about what can be understood by the audience because they've been going over it for 2 years. So it helps to have an editor come in with a fresh perspective and ask them challenging questions about what they're doing. It's the same with on set, shooting. It helps to have a DOP actually capture the images so that you can manage all of the other parts that are involved in directing, and so that speaks to what Lesedi was saying about energy. But then also to say, for example, the writer-director combo is kind of almost always a given that the person who writes the story will direct it. So I think it's, And then I just wanted to, I don't know if you feel the same way, Lesedi, but as a filmmaker, curator, for a long time, I was walking around with an uncertainty and an imposter complex. Can you do these two things? Are you allowed to produce and then also be curating and programming films, etc.? And then I looked around and I was like, there's also, because a lot of us here in this call are women and also women of color, and there's also a kind of an inclination to double guess, to second guess yourself about legitimacy and whether it's okay for you to wear these different hats. And then I looked around in the industry and I was like, there's a lot of white men who are doing this thing comfortably. And so I think there's also a really great need for us as women, especially as women of color, to be a lot more confident to wear the hats that we wear and not be apologetic about it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think even just to add to that, let's not pretend this industry is allowing us to buy land and buy cars and all of that kind of stuff, right? So we also to gig ourselves out, So you could be producing something and fundraising, then you need to gig yourself out to be able to program. Then you might have to gig yourself out to, I don't know, lecture. So there's also the part where the multiple hats are necessary. And on the African continent specifically, where there aren't any social systems, there aren't any social grant systems that are going to help you out while you're trying to raise funds. So I think that's the one part. But of course, there's a lot of doubt that comes in, right? Am I a jack of all trades and a master of none? All of those things. But it's actually to understand the entire value chain sometimes of the industry could also be beneficial when you're working specifically with first-time filmmakers, to be able to say, okay, well, you have this idea, that's great, but I've worked at a finance forum, I'm programming here, so I understand where your film is going to live. I understand that this idea that you have is actually shouldn't be a film. go to therapy, write a letter to your mom, like nobody cares, right? Or
Make a
this is
podcast.
yeah, this is what, and that's it. This is what you need to inject into it. Is it just audio? So I think having a bird's eye view and experience in different tiers of the industry also makes African producers and African filmmakers far more knowledgeable, I think, than some of the, some of the European and North American counterparts that zone in on one thing. And we need that diversity on the continent. We can't act like we don't need it. So yeah.
So there's a question from an anonymous attendee about if Mnet or Netflix commissions one's project, how or when does the production company or producers get their cut from the profits of the project? I think I will save everyone's time by telling anonymous attendee that you never make a cut from something that's commissioned because you're working for someone else to make content from them. Then there's another anonymous question about, for a filmmaker to enjoy the profits of their content, does one have to self-fund their content or project? I think not necessarily. But if there's anyone who wants to elaborate on this, and welcome back, Leila, we have a question for you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Dipur Habedi asked, if NFVF commissioned my work, would I have 100% of the rights? NFVF does not commission work. They give grant funding for work. So then you still own the rights to your work. Leila, while you were gone, we opened up the Q&A section and there was a question which I think you should be able to help us to answer, which is, what happens when or if the work does not recoup profit after acquiring a loan? Danger music.
Dum, dum, dum.
You really were the only one that could answer this. We were like, where's Leila? Where is Leila?
What happens? Do you sleep on the streets?
In the streets, and they take your house. That's why it's better to make them when you own nothing. You have nothing that they can take. That's my advice. No. So basically, when you draw up the contracts with things like venture loans, obviously the onus is on you, and the hope is that you will recoup the money. But the film model is not an exact science, and they're aware of that as a film unit, both in all the development banks that specifically focus on film. And one must remember that a large part of their mandate is to also stimulate the economy. And that's why we're very blessed in certain aspects in terms of this country and those specific models of raising what is called a loan. They won't come after you, but you need to comply with what they set out in their contracts, which is there are a certain list of things called conditions precedent, where when you're constructing the deal with them, they'll say every 3 months you need to report on what the firm's been doing. Every 3 months we need a sales report. We need the money that the firm makes also goes into an independent company's bank account called a collection agency. And the collection agency is responsible then for dividing up the whatever funds the firm generates to whoever is owed what percentage of money. So everything must be just above board, and you must always report, and you must always explain, okay, the film was supposed to do really well on cinema, but it didn't because COVID hit. There is an understanding then, as long as you're consistently communicating. And remember, the lifespan of a film is very, very long, specifically one that's not commissioned, and that's the funding is raised from different entities. The film will continue to earn revenue for 10 to 20 years. 10 years is kind of the model that we've put in place in terms of how long a film actually generates income. So it's a long drawn out period. And then what you'll find will happen is that, like, in 5 years time, I will make a massive, amazingly big blockbuster movie, please God. And then people will then go back and watch what we did before. So it's not an exact science, but what is important is to always comply and always make sure that you also understand that beyond just making a film, you are also supporting and stimulating an industry. And a large part of their incentives for why they finance film is partially also to do that. So yeah, it's all about communication. It's all about keeping your things in order. Nobody's going to come after you. It's a risk. Film is the highest risk investment ever, but it's also one of the investments that has the potential to pay off immensely.
Thank you, Leila, and thank you for coming back to help us close this conversation. I think there's a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A chat, some of which can only really be addressed in an extensive producing training workshop. So I want to invite, firstly, I want to recommend platforms like Encounters, DFM, I think Discop, I don't know if Discop is still happening, as platforms where you can go and attend workshops where training, well, not like, yeah, some training and information, insider information about how the industry works, as platforms that people should follow, platforms that give opportunities for learning the ins and outs of working in the industry. But also the National Film and Video Foundation has extensive training opportunities that are available. And I would just like to invite you, Refilwe, to please explain to people what training opportunities are available through the National Film and Video Foundation and how people can access those trainings. And before you go, I just want to say for people living in KwaZulu-Natal, the KZN Film Commission also offers film training for people living in KZN. So you should look, I think it's KwaZuluNatalFilm.com, or just find their website if I've said the wrong URL link for opportunities for KZN filmmakers to do trainings. So Refilwe, can you talk a little bit about the training opportunities at NFVF before we close the session?
So basically there is Sediba training. So there is training for aspirant writers. It's basically a course that will happen over the course of 5 months. Every, I think, month end, usually people would meet and there'd be like extensive workshops on writing and the like. There is producers programs. There is there's one that's going to come up for, I think, script editing. So I mean, all of the opportunities are communicated via our website and our social media pages. I think last year, I mean, some of the programs we weren't able to carry them out due to COVID and not being able to being in one vicinity. But I think there's been a lot of programs that have been shorter workshop style opportunities where you just, you know, there'll be criteria in terms of whether, if you're interested in the opportunity, this is what you do to apply. NFVF will even go as far as get you data to make sure that you're not cut off during the session, with various stakeholders within the industry at different phases. So I think, yeah, it's just a matter of looking out for those opportunities for workshops to empower yourself, especially if you are someone who's new to the industry. You know, there are some people who don't necessarily have training like from, you know, haven't gone to varsity and things like that. But, you know, if you do sign up for these opportunities, then it does show that you are like serious about the craft and, you know, upskilling yourself. But don't discount the internet as well.
The internet and Google is your friend. Thanks to our panelists, Nombuso, Lesedi, Refilwe, and Leila. I'm saying your names in the order that it appears on my screen. Thank you to Girls in Film South Africa for organizing this very interesting chat from my end, I'm sorry. And then I want to give you a heads up that Girls in Film's next conversation will be in marketing and distribution. So please look out for that. I know there were a lot of questions around marketing and distribution. I would advise that you follow Girls in Film South Africa. The handle on Instagram is girlsinfilm_RSA. And you can be able to be informed about events that they're hosting in South Africa or in Africa in general, and be plugged in and connected to a very vibrant community of femme identifying filmmakers making content in South Africa and everywhere else. And guys, it's been such an interesting conversation. I just have to now take a break and eat, but really it's been so lovely, and it's a pity we're not doing it at a festival. We're not going to the pool deck for a little tot. But You know,
Good old day.
It's been really great to connect with you ladies, and thanks to Girls in Film for putting us together, and thank you for attendees who've been so engaged and asking such interesting questions, and hopefully see you all soon, and really dying to see your films in the future, and sayonara.